Hello, everyone. I'm Paul,
And I'm Dave.
and we just played AEW Fight Forever a little while ago. It was your first time playing it, Dave.
Yes.
I've put in a little bit of time. So before we played it, I'd played maybe like an hour and a half, 2 hours. Not a ton. Um, so I think we should kind of go over. You're not really a wrestling game guy.
No.
So you've played like one or two of the 2K games.
Hmm.
You've played my favorite wrestling game, Here Comes the Pain,
Yes.
and WCW NWO Revenge,
Yes.
and either No Mercy or WrestleMania 2000.
That, and additionally, within my own time, a version of a wrestling game that Xbox put out with the specific neat characters they have on it.
Which one's this?
It's like Fire Pro Wrestling. Again, simple sort of thing with a bunch of little me character sort of things, but essentially the same controls.
Oh, they did that really crappy version of Fire Pro.
Yes.
Yeah, that's not Fire like that. Calling that Fire Pro is offensive to me.
My apologies.
Oh no, you did play Fire Pro World or World Tour, whatever it was that came out on PS4. Because I brought that over and you played it with me, and Justin played it as well.
Yes, with that one.
That game, it's great, but it's a pain in the ass.
Yeah. Oh, there's also the infamous one. Several years old, either 2020 and or 2018. Still have it, but haven't placed it in the PS4 for quite some time.
Oh, I thought you were. We were thinking of a different one because you bought 2K18, I think.
I believe that was
Because it wasn't 20 because 20 was terrible and unplayable.
Yeah.
And we also did. You bought me for my birthday one year.
Yes, the
Hulk
Hulk
Hogan's-
Hogan Connect one for the
Yes.
Xbox 360.
And I forced you to play that at one point.
Yes, we tried.
We tried. That is a good answer because that game was dreadful.
Again, we tried. Like, there was the many particular things on it. It was on the Connect, which is already quite a wall to go over, but...
That was a ton of fun because I remember Justin being like, "Why can't I fucking kick?" Because the game just doesn't work. Anyway, I've played a ton of wrestling games.
And I can understand the appeal. I've worked with a couple particular wrestling games, but just with my style of play and other particular things, I am not good when it comes to wrestling games, or I'm very out of practice with them.
Yeah, and I've played a ton from basically like the PS1 to like N64 PS1 era to current, and a couple before that, like a couple NES and SNES games, so I'm quite familiar with them. What did you think of playing the game? Because I want to just kind of go over the gameplay first, because I think that's kind of like the best part of this game.
Okay, just going with that. Again, with getting myself somewhat familiarized with how the controls sort of go, how things go from there. Everything is at least responsive enough to... Sorry, that's my case
okay.
probably. Responsive enough. I found, especially with going with older games, to a couple of the games made a couple of years back, that there was always either a preciseness or a particular time window that's very strict in some cases, that a button could be activated that you could manage to get your move in, where this one has a little bit more openness to it. It's not quite as strict as I found with other particular games in the past I played with. It's still... not so much with that, but it is still good for all the particular control it does have within it. It's one of the cases that I've seen, it either tries to push a little bit too much into wrestling realism in certain matches, where this one gives a little bit of levity to absolute ridiculousness.
Yeah, this is a much more arcadey game than the WWE ones.
Mm-hmm.
Like the WWE games are like, they're taking a very like sports simulation approach. Like, you know how you play like the NBA 2K games and they're really trying to make it feel like basketball?
I think the particular game style I usually see, though I haven't really played much of them, is the football related ones. Since there's particular game modes where you technically don't control any of the players, it all goes by plans that you specifically have, and just see how everything sort of pans out from there.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing this game has going for it is it's very pick up and play friendly. Like, I handed you a controller and we had a competitive match, like, right away.
And again, with video game experience and knowing how the games sort of work in that sort of case, it's easy enough to just pick it up, play, and go on from there. If it was a completely new person, it's still a bit of the case of you have to give them an idea how the controller kind of works, know where all the buttons are, but if that hurdle is on top of things, you can pretty much hand it to just about anybody.
Yeah, it's very pick up and play friendly. Like if you've played a PS4, PS5, whatever before, this is you can pick up and play this and be competitive within like a match or two. It is a little weird for me because the controls are totally different from the WWE games. So I'm like, why doesn't this? Oh right, like that button's not reversal in this game. So there's a bit of muscle memory where I'm like, oh wait, no, that's not right.
Yeah, one other tricky sort of thing to have with it, especially switching over with this one from the other wrestling games in the past.
Yeah. So the one-on-one match we had was fine, but I wanted you to kind of learn the controls before we went into the more absurd stuff. Yeah. So then we went into the lights out match, which is basically just like a no DQ, where we got to play with a bunch of weapons.
Yes.
And you found the best weapon in the game.
Yes, because out of all the particular things, and in most cases it's completely understandable. There's the typical tables, typical one-handed objects that you can grab.
Yeah, there's like frying pans, there's crowbars, there's hockey sticks, there's lacrosse sticks, there's cricket bats, there's all sorts of stuff.
Then there's the two interesting ones to take from it. The first is a football helmet, which people are like, oh god, it's a football game now? It's like, no, just something to smack onto the opponent's face and cause issue with that. But the big thing that when he was sort of mentioning about it is like, on the one hand, it's not too ridiculous that this weapon would supposedly be in the game, but what it does, my goodness, but it's a skateboard.
Yeah, it's so good because you can ride the skateboard, and everybody in the game can just get on the skateboard and ride around and do ollies.
It's just a wrestling game that could most likely have a complete skateboarding side game to it. It'd be like, oh dear God, what sort of rabbit hole could this lead down? But on the whole, it's a nice, interesting left field addition to add to the game, especially with the fact that this game also has mini games to it.
Yeah, and there's some other weapons that we didn't get to. So there's like fire extinguishers where you can like spray people with them. There's the football helmet, which you mentioned, but there's also football where you can just get a football and like pivot at someone.
Oh, there you go.
And stuff like that. Like I really love that. Like there's like there's the thumbtacks like you would expect, but I do love the variety. Because there's just like crazy shit that you can pull out from under the ring and be like, I'm gonna hit somebody with a fucking skateboard now, or I'm gonna hit somebody with a pizza box.
It's also the little case of, sweetie, it's going from wrestling. If you go back in history, there are a bunch of ridiculous shit that they've decided to do.
It reminds me a lot of, I think it was WrestleMania 2000, it might have been No Mercy, but there was like where you could just go to a crowd and pull weapons out. And like they would just like give you weapons, and like there were things like you could go over and get like a copy of The Rock's book and hit someone with it, or there was like those I don't know if you'll get this reference, but like I think it was in like Minnesota, but like at like their football games they would wear these big like cheese hats.
Oh yes. You
could get one of those and bash someone on the head with it and stuff.
There you go.
It feels a lot like that, and that's kind of what I think the biggest takeaway is. It's like this feels like a spiritual successor to those games.
Yeah.
It's more updated, and like there's some like quality of life improvements. But in terms of like playing the game, I'm like, oh, I feel like I'm like 10 again. Because this feels so similar to those games in a lot of ways.
No, that's understandable.
But you mentioned mini games. And we played some mini games.
Yes, we did.
So the first one we played was Death Race X, which is a skateboarding mini game.
Because you put a skateboard in the game, it's like, why not make a mini game out of it?
So you ride around on a skateboard, and you have to like jump into each other and like knock each other over, and you get points for basically bashing each other. And it's quite fun. And there's like barbed wire around and stuff.
Yeah.
That was a lot of fun. And then we did, what was the other one?
The other one was with the masks, with four players placed in the ring with a audience member.
Yeah.
Then have to try and stick their mask on them to gain a point.
Yeah, and you can like bash your opponents with the mask. It's called Join Us, that's what it was. It was the Dark Order one. And then we played Penta Says, which is basically just like a rhythm game.
Because it's a perfectly easy game to throw into any sort of thing with that. And with the couple of things that I remember seeing with it, because when it comes to those sorts of games, it's kind of the focus concentration to do the things, but looking at how the characters were reacting and doing certain movements of things, it makes sense to the character for doing those sorts of actions, and as well as seeing the other characters kind of following along with it as well. It's always fun to see.
Yeah, there's a bunch of other ones too. There's a baseball one where you're in like a football stadium and you have to like hit this like a person is in like this baseball and they get thrown to you and you have to like hit them. And there's a bunch of other ones. There's like a chip collector one, and like there's I think like 8 or 9. They feel very Mario Party inspired. Now let's move on to the barbed wire death match.
Because
exploding barbed wire death match. That probably.
Because if wrestling matches weren't completely and utterly ridiculous, here's one to put to the list.
So, for those of you who don't know, and there's probably like nobody listening who doesn't know what this match is, but the ropes on the ring are covered in barbed wire, and then there's like these 2 boards that are in 2 of the corners that also have barbed wire on them. And if you throw somebody into the ropes, an explosion goes off, and it gets very bloody very quickly.
And after 2 minutes, the entire ring explodes.
Yes. So they actually have done this match in AEW.
Again, if there wasn't the idea with sticking it in a video game, I would not be surprised if someone in one of the shows is like, let's do this thing!
And they've done a bunch of them in Japan, too.
Yeah.
It's so much fun to play. It's ridiculous and over the top, but it fits this game so perfectly because it is so arcadey. Like, the fact that I was playing as Malachi Black and you were Eddie Kingston, at like one point I hit the black mass and you like kind of like fall over right into the barbed wire and the explosion goes off. I'm like, that's fucking cool. Yeah, that match was a lot of fun. I take it you enjoyed it?
Indeed, it was definitely fun. There's always the bit of the hurdle in my case of I have no idea what the heck I'm doing. It's just like getting past that. It's just like, let's see what's ridiculous that's gonna happen.
Yeah, I think the one thing about this game is like it makes even like the stipulation matches. I think it makes them really accessible. Where it's like, oh, this is just a different environment where I have to beat the shit out of someone. They're like it's pretty simple. Now I'm going to briefly talk about the story mode because that is both a good thing and a bad thing. So the story mode is much like the old Ukes games like No Mercy or WrestleMania 2000, where you can kind of go off on different paths and stuff. Like you pick anybody on the roster or you can create your own character, and there's slightly different storylines. And it's like, that's a cool idea in theory. I don't think it's executed terribly well. Because there's some stuff where I'm like, so like one of the things is like, oh, you get like, it's kind of almost like a RPG almost in parts where it's like, oh, you get 3 turns before you have to go, or 4 turns before you have to go to Dynamite. So you can do like 4 things. And it's like you have to eat at some point so you can regain energy. And then like you can do a workout, which you risk like getting injured, but it also ups your stats and things like that. The thing is, like when you go to do a workout, it's just a cutscene. I'm like, why isn't that a mini game? Like,
yeah, that's true.
Or like going to eat, I'm like, okay, that's fine. It's a little cutscene, and like, whatever. I don't really care. And then like you can go sightseeing and stuff, and I'm like, that's cool, but it's just like somebody just got like a JPEG and pasted it in the background, and your character stands in front of it, and like, oh, that's the Statue of Liberty, and then that's the cutscene, and it's kind of like that's a cool idea, but I feel like you could have done more with it. It is. I like the idea of having the branching story. I just don't feel like it's executed as well as it could be.
Okay. Again, sadly wasn't shown this particular side of the game and other things from that, but it's definitely one of the best tracks that they probably could have taken with it, especially with wrestling games nowadays having the story mode going in that sort of direction with it. I can see your concern with the actions that you can supposedly take, that it ups your stats, but it's just a quick little cutscene in certain sort of cases, and it would be more interesting to have something actually be put into it. though it's a bit of a concern of how much it would supposedly take to put something like that in to have it work like that, as well as sort of the concern of skill over simple reward or other sorts of things there.
I mean, the only thing I think is, like, if you look at, like, the Madden games that I was playing on, like, the PS2, like, if you're playing as, like, a quarterback in the off-season, they would be like, you can do these drills, and you have the option of, I don't want to be bothered, and you can just, like, hit a button and skip them all, and it just goes like, okay, you get X amount of skill points. Or you can play them, and you could potentially do better. And there are a bunch of, like, little mini games you could go through and, like, up your skills, or you could just skip it and be like, yeah, I don't care, and it would just give you a default amount.
Okay.
And that was, like, 20 years ago. So I feel like putting a couple more mini games in wouldn't have been that much of an issue. But I do like that, unlike the WWE games, because they're all fully voice, like, this game there's very little voice acting in. It's mostly text on screen, which is kind of necessary because of the branching stories. You'd have to record a lot of dialogue.
Yeah.
The WWE games are very produced. Like, everything's voice acted, so they can't really do the branching stories. The other thing I wouldn't say that I'm unhappy with, but that I'm like, this kind of sucks, is there's not a ton of content in this game for launch. Because, like, we played a one-on-one match, the barbed wire match, we did a lights out match, and some mini games, and that was basically all of the, like, stuff we could do.
Like, aside from that, I would be going into options of 2-player match, 3-player match, 4-player match, and then like, a couple little options that were on there.
And there's not a cage match. There's not, like, those other kind of, like, staple kind of things where I'm like, you should probably have a cage match in this game. Now, granted, that is something that could easily be patched in later, or put up for DLC, because they have announced, like, their DLC plans, and there's, like, I think, like, another 5 or 6 mini games coming or something, and a bunch of other characters. Like, they are seemingly putting resources into adding more stuff later, but it is a bit late on content.
Yeah, with that. And it's kind of one of the particular things I've been hearing online and people bringing up in arguments and discussions of, with this era of video games, it's one of the caveats or things that you kind of have to work with. And I'm not sure if it's kind of a studio case of things or how certain games are created nowadays, that sometimes a game is going to come out and there's only going to be kind of the barest amount of content before everything else gets added to it. Where, I don't want to make this the biggest comparison, the newest Zelda game was in development for pretty much 6 years, where it was first sort of cased of, it was from the previous game and could supposedly come out from there, aside from them adding a completely additional system to it, expanding most of the stuff within the game, and shifting things around with what they could manage to do at the time. It perfectly makes sense, where, commenting with one of the developers on the game, they essentially could have released it a year earlier, but they took the 1 year off to polish everything up so the game wouldn't break immediately.
Yeah, I will say that, at least in my experience, Fight Forever has been very stable. Like, I haven't had crashes or anything. But that is one of the things, like, with the Nintendo games, they kind of don't do DLC. They have for, like, Mario Kart, but that's really the only one I can think of.
Yeah, pretty much that.
Yeah, their games are very feature-rich right out of the box. But yeah, I think this game, it's fun. It's a lot of, like I said, it's very pick-up-and-play friendly. There are downsides to it. The roster's kind of small. And it is very out of date.
Yeah.
In terms of, this game was supposed to come out, like, a year ago, and, like, the staging and stuff is completely different now, and there's a bunch of other stuff where I'm like, okay, that's kind of old. But, oh well. Like, I can live with having the old stage or whatever. I'm like, that's fine. But it is a lot of fun. And it feels like a good platform that they can build off of.
I think the one particular question I have is your supposed concern for if there's going to be DLC that comes out with additional characters, other things from there. Is it going to be having you clench your wallet a little bit, being like, I don't know if I really want to spend the money to get this, or be concerned of how much they'll supposedly penny pinch you for what sort of things they'll add to it in the future.
So I already bought the season 1 pass, so I get all the DLC that they've announced so far. The thing that makes me less worried about the DLC is they're not like the WWE games. There's a new one every year, so at a certain point they're just going to be like, okay, we're just going to cut off. Whereas AEW has said they plan to support this for a couple of years, where it's like, okay, so if you release, let's say, a $20 season pass next year, that's a whole lot cheaper than a new game. So if they're like, okay, we'll do a new game every 3 years, and they put out DLC packs to kind of get you through that, I'm like, yeah, that's fine. Like, that's a whole lot cheaper than buying a new game. So if it's good DLC, I'll buy it. If it's crap, then I won't. Like, if they're like, no, we want $10 so you can play as fucking Brody King, I'm like, well, no, that's not worth $10. But if it's like $1 or $2, absolutely. It all depends on cost and stuff. Yeah, no,
always the typical question whenever it comes to that sort of stuff.
I think the game is fun, and I think it's. I hope the game does well, because I think that especially if it gets a sequel, that could be really good. And I think it has a chance of doing well because the game. I know graphically it's not the prettiest. It looks kind of like a PS2 game sometimes, especially the faces.
Yeah. Again, there's a particular crowd for it. With us to maybe a little bit of the younger crowd, they're usually fairly good with how certain games kind of look. They can forgive the graphical style going down a little bit, where the newest crowd coming into video games and whatnot needs to have the newest thing. Make sure it's completely realistic. Make sure everything looks all completely and utterly pretty with certain things like that. It's just, styling and whatnot for that.
I think the look of the game kind of makes sense because it is more arcadey and it is kind of like a more cartoony look. I just wish they had gone a little further with it. Like, kind of gone, like, more all out in the cartooniness.
Okay.
Or gone more photorealistic because it's this weird blend.
Okay. Not quite diving into Uncanny Valley, but kind of standing on the precipice of it.
Yeah, it's like either go full on, like, this probably won't mean anything to you, but like go full on WWE All-Stars, which was very over the top cartoony, like everybody was super ripped and they were like 400 pounds of pure muscle and they just look like action figures. Or go with a more realistic look. But this is kind of this weird in the middle kind of thing.
Okay. Because I vaguely remember a particular one a couple years back where it still had the realistical characters design for the time, but any super move or signature move that they do is they jump a decent 6 feet in the air to perform throwdowns or slams onto the ring.
That, like, All-Stars was like that. Like, where you would, like, you could, like, stand in the ring and do a backflip to the top of the cage and stuff.
Yeah, something like that.
It was, that game was so much fun. Anyway, did you have anything else to add about this game, Dave?
It's still a bit of a case of if it was sitting on the store shelf at the time or being pre-owned, it'd probably be a case of, I don't think I really need to add this to my collection in most cases, but it will still be something on my radar for if something in the future for any sort of time or experience of a wrestling game, it'd be kind of like, oh, I remember playing this with Paul. Let's go ahead and pick it up.
I think one of the things that will help the game is, like, they've got some big names on the cover. So they've got, like, Jon Moxley and Chris Jericho and CM Punk. But they've also got some weird-looking people.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of helps, because they've got Darby Allin, who's got, like, half his face painted and looks super cool. And there's, like, Kenny Omega, and there's other people. And I'm like, that might actually get people to pick it up.
Yeah.
Because there's, like, people that you might recognize, and then there's these people that are like, who the fuck is that? I gotta play that to find out who that is. Like, I think there's a chance of that. But yeah, I think the game's it's fun, but it is kind of lacking in content, I think. So yeah, I would say maybe don't pick it up right now, but wait for a sale. Because it is fun. But yeah, so I think that's gonna be it for us. I'm Paul,
and I'm Dave.